My name's Foster Creppel, and we're at Woodland Plantation in Plaquemines Parish, Louisiana. Well, the plantation was built in 1834, and the overseer's house was built in 1834. Spirits Hall was built in 1873, and we moved it here in October of '98. In the 1790s, William Johnson and George Bradish, who built Woodland later in 1834, originally built Magnolia Plantation in the 1790s, and they were the first American river pilots. And they worked for Juan Ronquillo, and Juan Ronquillo was a Spanish river pilot who controlled the deep delta. He was the predecessors to today's bar pilots, Nobra pilots, or crescent pilots and Nobra pilots, which are the pilots that move ships up and down the river. Right. So they were, William Johnson and George Bradish were the first American river pilots. They worked for him, and they built Magnolia Plantation originally. And Magnolia Plantation was about 4 miles south of here. But when they built those, they also built 4 two-story brick slave quarters that were situated right where this building is now. They were in cahoots with Jean Lafitte. Jean Lafitte would steal people's schooners and boats and steal their slaves offshore. Okay. And he'd bring them up Grand Bayou. Grand Bayou is a shortcut to the Gulf. It's only about 25 miles to the Gulf on Grand Bayou, which is a tidal bayou. It's about 75 to 80 miles to the Gulf on the Mississippi River. So he'd take the slaves, bring them up Grand Bayou, and store them at these brick slave quarters. So if you believe in spirits, the spirits of those poor people could have still been haunting those grounds, because they had a lot of people in those, and it was terrible, terribly hot and terrible conditions. So if you believe in spirits, the spirits still could have been haunting these grounds. And as a church, it was a place of healing, redemption, spirituality, and forgiveness. So we took this building that was created for spirituality and forgiveness, moved it 14 miles and put it over the grounds that had seen all this pain and suffering. And now everyone's welcome to enjoy spirits.
Yeah, man.
So that's why we named this building Spirits Hall. But mainly we're a 25-room country inn. We cater to fishermen from all over the country. Our fishing is dynamite. I mean, it's just incredible. And people say, oh, and your food's so great. And I'm like, well, it's kind of easy to do good food here because we have a real advantage. We get the freshest seafood you can imagine. Yeah. My buddy today calls me this morning. He says, well, I got you some crabs. And I said, I thought you weren't going crabbing. He said, well, they started giving. So I went out and got you a bushel from him. So we always have a fresh, abundant supply of good seafood. So.
Well, yeah, I can see where that'd be popular.
Yeah, it helps. It definitely is correct. Well, we really don't want people just coming in without calling anyway. We're open, I tell people we're open 24/7 by reservation only. My family is, my dad was a fighter pilot in the Air Force, so I grew up living in a lot of different places. Sure. But he's from Crown Point, Lafitte area, which is right across the marsh. It's down in Lower Jefferson. My ancestors are from Lafourche and Terrebonne Parish, so on my father's side, I'm from the Bayous. My mom's from New Orleans.
And so you're feeling comfortable here, you're home.
Yeah, I don't think I'll ever live anywhere else.
Are you talking the Mississippi River? Are you talking Grand Bayou?
I'm talking the marsh, yeah. We're talking the estuary, the estuary of southeastern Louisiana, the Mississippi Delta, which is rapidly washing away.
No, we're concerned about that too.
Yeah, it's a terrible thing. And, you know, I used to be real optimistic that we could restore it. I'm not so optimistic anymore. When I first got here, I used to go to all the meetings and thought, man, there's really something we can do. If we open enough siphons, if we create enough diversion, if we do enough dredges, if we rebuild our barrier islands and some of our cheniers, then we can rebuild our wetlands. Well, you know, 16 years ago, I thought that. 10 years ago, I thought that. Then Katrina came and went. And then I guess when I started really thinking we're not going to be able to do this was 2 years ago when we had the highest river stage we've had in some 70 years.
2011. Right?
2011, right. 2 years ago. I went to a meeting where they all were getting together. We were having a meeting. We were there, and I talked to these guys. I'm like, we didn't have one diversion or one siphon open. They had them all closed down. And I'm like, we're getting together to talk about spending these hundreds of millions and billions of dollars for wetlands restoration, but we're not using the ones we have in existence. Right. I don't know why we're all getting together as this group and talking about wetlands restoration, what we can do to restore it, blah, 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 blah. The oil and gas companies were there. They were financing the meeting. The Corps of Engineers was not there, and I'm surprised when we have these meetings about wetlands and about resiliency and all these other things, why we don't have the Corps of Engineers. They're very important.
Yes.
They're a very important part of these conversations, and they should be at the table every time. And a lot of times they're not there. So I'm thinking, we really are not serious enough. If we can't bring the oyster fishermen together, the oil and gas fishermen, oil and gas industry together, and the Corps of Engineers together to talk about these issues, because they're, you know, I mean, first of all, we clear cut all the cypress swamps. So that was not good. But we did that way back, you know, we did that 100 plus years ago, 110, 150 years ago. And those were swampy areas. And the river used to have swamps. And that's one thing, you know, some people who don't like diversions and siphons say it's too much fresh water, it's going to kill all the marsh. Well, it's killing saltwater marsh because there used to be swamps there. They used to have swamps that catch all that fresh water and all the nitrogen, phosphates, and all that first. That used to be, that's what caught all the fresh water out of the river, and then it became brackish and salt on the outside. Well, as we haven't had any fresh water in those swamps for, what, 80 years now? When we're introducing fresh water and sediment, we're reintroducing it to salt water, marshes. Yes, it's going to not do a very good job of restoring those. But it will, in time, we've got to be patient, restore freshwater swamps. We need bogs and swamps and cypress swamps. That's what we first did. Then we built the levee in 1928. Then all the extractivist companies came in, Freeport McMoran, the sulfur companies, oil and gas companies, and we dredged and drilled and dredged and drilled and dredged and drilled. Then we dredged all the oyster reefs and clam reefs, and all of this is doing its part to destroy it. Now, it's going to take a long time to restore this delta. People say, well, Foster, that's going to take a long time. It took thousands of years to grow. And I said, yeah, it took thousands of years for this delta to be formed and to build. And I said, and we've destroyed it in about 100. Now, to think that we're going to build diversions and siphons and wetlands restoration projects, and they're going to turn it around in 5 years is kind of not being realistic. It's not, you're not using your brain when you're looking at the equation. I mean, the Delta is a very dynamic living system, as you know. The whole Mississippi River Delta is, the whole river, the whole system. And it's moving and changing all the time. But the Delta especially is constantly moving and changing and building and growing and moving and changing. And we can't make it static. We can't force it to go right here and say, oh, why isn't it rebuilding? Well, because that's not how it builds. It's got to be a little bit wild and untamed and free. And we have to live sort of above that. So I tell people all the time, the only way we're going to be able to do is if we raise our highways, raise our houses, and lower our levees, build spillways and diversions. Yes, do some dredging. I think it's good that we put sediment from the river out into the marsh in different places, but make sure we put them in the right places. Yes. And that we also introduce that fresh water. But that year that I was talking about, not a drop of water was coming out of any of the siphons or diversions during the highest river stage we've had in 70 years, and we could have inundated the marsh and swamp with fresh water. One of my good guides I was talking to the other day, and he wrote an article in one of the online, and he was saying, oh yeah, these are not good for my fishing holes. And I'm like, your fishing holes, when you get to your fishing holes, are you running a natural bayou? Or are you looking at your map, your GPS? He goes, no, I'm running over with land. I said, yeah, exactly, that's what I'm telling you. Everywhere you're going used to be land. And you're telling us when we're trying to restore this, we're taking away your best fishing hole? You're fishing on where every place that you're fishing used to be marsh, or it was swamp. Right. All they had was a few natural bayous. They had freshwater bayous, they had saltwater bayous. Saltwater bayous carried the tides in and out of the wetlands. Freshwater bayous carry fresh water from the river out to the wetlands. And we don't have those anymore. So, you know, can we restore it when they're saying no because the oyster fishermen and the don't want us to reintroduce fresh water, and the alligator guys over here collecting the eggs, and they're afraid the high river is going to kill all their eggs. I'm thinking, alligators have been living down here for millions and millions of years, way before we were even walking the planet. Alligators were living and dealing with fresh water and too much of it during high rivers and losing a few eggs. We're not going to destroy the alligators. They get sued by the oyster fishermen on the West Bank, and the alligator eggs collectors on the East Bank. And then I said it during a meeting, and he felt real bad. He's like, oh, I can't believe you're saying this, Foster. And I'm like, I was like, come on, guys. If we're going to be serious about this, let's be serious and let's be honest. Right. Because if we're going to get serious about wetlands restoration, it's not going to be easy. And a lot of people aren't going to like it. And it's going to do some damage to some oyster reefs. It's going to make some folks' best fishing holes non-fishable. And then it's going to be saltwater swamps. We have to recreate freshwater swamps. We need cypress swamps again. We need bogs of black water where you can smell it. I remember as a kid, because my grandfather lived in Crown Point, and it's right where Bayou Des Familles runs into Bayou Barataria. And Bayou Barataria was a freshwater bayou from the Mississippi River, dumped in the top northern part of Barataria Bay. And they had huge oyster reefs on the southern side of Barataria Bay. And it had a different smell there. It was that black water. It was fresh water. It's fresh and brackish. And you've got bass living in it. You've got mink and otter, and you've got muskrat, and you've got shoepick and gar and crappie and all these fish that want fresh water. We need freshwater swamps too, and they're good. And then we had a lot more ducks. And growing up in the 60s, I used to go visit those areas. And walking in the woods, I was like, Grandpa, why do we have all these big oak trees here and all these palmetto and this black soil? Because that's a freshwater bayou where two freshwater bayous came together. That's what created the point, Crown Point. And on the other side was more salt and brackish, and that's where we'd go duck hunt. So I sort of learned about those growing up as a kid, and I realized as I got older and older that smell's going away. There's no more fresh water out there.